Pay attention to Catherine Campbell, 36 years old, a police constable with the Truro Police Department. On the night of September 10th, 2015, she is stepping out of her Dartmouth apartment, catching a cab, heading toward the glowing lights of the Halifax Ale House. She has hours left to live because a man is already there, 27 years old, a former paramedic and one-time bouncer who knows that bar like the back of his hand. He is nursing a drink, freshly heartbroken, carrying a specific kind of anger that has nowhere to go. On this night, Catherine Campbell has one goal: to unwind after a long patrol shift and enjoy a few drinks. On this night, this man has one intention, and Catherine Campbell has no idea what it is. What happens in the next few hours will send shockwaves through Nova Scotia, ignite a national controversy, and raise questions about justice that Canadians are still arguing about today. Dartmouth sits just across the harbor from Halifax, connected by bridge, close enough to see the city lights from your window at night. Catherine lived on Bed and Arrows Drive, a quiet residential street where nothing unusual ever seemed to happen. When Halifax Regional Police conducted a welfare check on her apartment that Monday morning, they found no signs of a struggle. Her personal belongings, her purse, her phone, her everyday items were gone. A surveillance camera at her building had captured her leaving just days earlier, but she never came back through that door. The Truro Police Department opened a missing persons investigation immediately. Word spread fast. A police officer missing in Nova Scotia is not just a personal tragedy. It sends a chill through every station, every department, every officer who has ever driven home alone after a late shift. The community rallied, the appeals went out, and investigators began to trace every movement Catherine had made on the night she disappeared. What they found would lead them straight to a 37-year-old former paramedic named Christopher Garnier. And what he had done in the 45 minutes nobody was watching was something that no amount of courtroom maneuvering would ever be able to fully explain away. Shortly after midnight on September 11th, Catherine left her Dartmouth apartment and took a taxi to the Halifax Ale House, a downtown bar with a reputation for being a lively spot on a Thursday night. The taxi driver who drove her there would later tell police she seemed perfectly fine, not heavily intoxicated, not distressed, just a woman heading out for a few drinks after a long shift. She was in good form, he said, relaxed. Think about that for a moment. A woman who has just spent hours keeping the public safe, deciding to unwind with a night out. A completely ordinary decision, one that millions of people make every single week. But on this particular night, in this particular bar, Catherine Campbell would cross paths with Christopher Garnier. Garnier had history at the Halifax Ale House. He had worked there as a bouncer. He knew the layout, he knew the staff, and earlier that same day, he had told a friend who worked there that he and his girlfriend had just broken up. He was newly single, freshly displaced from his living situation, and by all accounts looking to blow off steam. Witnesses inside the bar later described the interaction between Catherine and Christopher as intimate, noticeably so. They were seen dancing together closely, making physical contact on the dance floor in a way that turned heads. People noticed them. That detail would become critically important later, because it established beyond any doubt that Christopher Garnier knew exactly who he left that bar with. Shortly after 3 in the morning, the two of them left together and got into a taxi. The taxi driver on that ride would later tell investigators that he could not hear much of what they were saying to each other, but that he could feel something, a tension, something slightly off between the two passengers in the back of his cab. He could not put his finger on it exactly. He just knew something felt not quite right. They were headed to the apartment of a man named Mitchell Devo, a friend of Garnier's. Christopher had been staying there since his girlfriend had asked him to leave. Mitchell had set up a pull-out mattress for him. When the taxi arrived at the Macaulay Street apartment in downtown Halifax, both Christopher and Catherine went inside. Mitchell Devo was not home. He had been out drinking at a different bar and would not return until the next morning. No one else was there. For the next 45 minutes, there is no surveillance footage, no witnesses, no one to confirm what happened inside that apartment except for the two people who were present, and only one of them would survive to tell the story. At approximately 4 in the morning, in the early hours of Friday, September 11th, surveillance cameras in the area around Macaulay Street captured something that would become the centerpiece of the entire prosecution. Christopher Garnier was seen dragging a green bin. It was heavy. That much was obvious from the way he was moving it. He was not rolling it casually down the sidewalk. He was straining, pulling it, working hard to move it along the street. And he was not alone in being observed. Multiple witnesses were up at that hour for their own reasons, and they all saw the same thing. A garbage truck driver noticed him. A man on his way to an early shift noticed him too, and later told police that when he made eye contact with Garnier, the man looked, in his words, quote-unquote, weird. There was something wrong about the scene, something that registered in the gut even before you could articulate exactly what it was. Christopher Garnier wheeled that green bin through downtown Halifax in the dark, toward the McDonald Bridge, close to Halifax Harbor. Near an overpass, he dumped its contents into the bushes below. Then he left the bin itself at a separate location. Inside that bin, he had placed Catherine Campbell's body. She was wrapped, hidden, discarded like something disposable, in the dark, while the city slept around her. Then Christopher Garnier walked back to the apartment on Macaulay Street and went to sleep on the couch. When Mitchell Devo returned to his apartment the next morning, he was surprised to find Christopher stretched out on the sofa. He was also surprised to notice that the pull-out mattress was missing entirely. When Mitchell asked about it, Christopher told him he had gotten sick during the night, vomited from drinking too much, and had thrown the mattress out. He told Mitchell not to worry about it. He would buy him a new one. Let that land for a second. A man has just strangled a woman to death, hauled her body through the streets of Halifax in a garbage bin, dumped her remains under an overpass, returned to clean up evidence of what he had done, and his explanation for the missing mattress is, "I drank too much and had a rough night." In the days that followed, specifically Saturday the 12th and Sunday the 13th, Christopher Garnier reconciled with his girlfriend, the same girlfriend who had recently ended things with him. He got back together with her over the weekend, apparently acting completely normal. No visible distress, no visible guilt. He went to his father's birthday party. He had a social life. He was, by all external appearances, just a guy having a regular weekend. Meanwhile, on Monday, September 14th, Catherine Campbell did not show up for her shift at the Truro Police Department. Her dispatch supervisor, who knew Catherine well enough to know she would always call if something came up, immediately raised the alarm. The welfare check was conducted. The apartment was searched. The investigation went into high gear. By this point, Christopher Garnier had already been on police radar. Investigators had been piecing together Catherine's movements from the night she disappeared, following the trail from her apartment to the taxi to the Halifax alehouse to the witness accounts of a man dragging something heavy down a street at 4 in the morning. A description had been developed. A name was emerging. Garnier was a suspect even before Catherine's body was found. On September 15th, 5 days after Catherine Campbell disappeared, her body was discovered near the overpass in Halifax, in the bushes where Christopher had dumped her. Nearby, investigators found her keys inside a garbage bin in the vicinity. The physical evidence was beginning to speak. Just over an hour after Catherine's remains were located, police moved in on Christopher Garnier while he was driving his car. What they found inside that vehicle stopped any lingering doubt about his intentions. Inside the car, there was a tarp, a rope, a blanket, and a 5-liter gas can that was half full. There was a backpack containing sandals, a long-sleeved hoodie, 3 t-shirts, a pair of pants, 6 pairs of underwear, toiletries, his passport, a deck of cards, and 2 boxes of Cipralex, a medication prescribed for depression. Think about what some of those items are useful for, taken together. Think about where he was driving. Police determined he was heading in the direction of where Catherine's body had been found. Whether he was going back to move her, to destroy evidence, or to do something else entirely was a question that would be pressed hard during his interrogation. He was arrested on the spot. Officers then returned to the Devo apartment on Macaulay Street. What they found there told a story Christopher Garnier had tried very hard to erase. There was blood, spots of it on the floor of the den, on the back of the television, on the handle to a cupboard that contained cleaning supplies, a cleaned Xbox console, multiple surfaces that had been wiped down but not thoroughly enough to escape forensic examination. All of the blood matched Catherine Campbell. Investigators also found something on a computer in the apartment. Someone had been searching for information about memory loss related to alcohol consumption and memory loss due to antidepressants. Christopher Garnier had been trying to figure out what he could plausibly claim not to remember. The autopsy report confirmed what the physical evidence had been suggesting. Catherine Campbell had died from strangulation. She also had a fractured nose and black eyes, injuries completely inconsistent with an accidental death. The interrogation of Christopher Garnier lasted 9.5 hours. Within that room, detectives pressed him on every detail, on the bin, on the mattress, on what he remembered and what he claimed not to remember, on why a man would drive toward a body with a tarp and a gas can in his back seat. The exchanges were recorded. Extracts would later be played during his trial. "You don't remember," the detective said. Or, "You don't want to remember?" "I don't remember," Garnier replied. But as the hours passed, and as detectives worked methodically through the timeline, something shifted. He began to acknowledge fragments. He remembered the taxi ride. He remembered being near the front door of the apartment.
Or the pullout. And she was...
He eventually said, When pressed on whether Catherine was still alive when he placed her in the compost bin, his answer was, no, she didn't suffer in there. How do you know she was dead? The detective pushed back.
You're a paramedic. How do you know that she was not alive?
He wasn't moving. A trained paramedic, a man who had spent professional time learning how to keep people alive, how to read vital signs, how to respond in medical crises. A man who used that same knowledge to confirm a woman's death before wheeling her body through the streets in a garbage bin. When asked about the tarp and the gas can, Garnier acknowledged they could have been for one or two things. The detective told him plainly, "You were going back there to get her, and you were going to burn the body." "I thought about it, yes," Garnier said. "I don't think I could have," he added, after a pause. Near the end of the interrogation, Garnier was asked what had happened in those 45 minutes in the apartment. He said he could not remember most of it. He said he snapped. He said his hands were dirty. He never provided a complete account of what he did to Catherine Campbell in that room. Following the interrogation, Christopher Garnier wrote a letter. It was read aloud by a police officer during subsequent proceedings. In it, he wrote, "I don't know where to start. I only hope this will give you some closure. I never wanted this to happen. I've always been a caring person, but this is my darkest moment. I don't expect you to forgive me for what happened, so I won't ask for your forgiveness. I do need you to know that I am so sorry this happened. If I could give my own life to get hers back, I would. I will carry this with me for the rest of my life." He was then charged with second-degree murder and indignity to human remains. He pleaded not guilty. Garnier was released on $100,000 bail and placed under house arrest. He subsequently violated those conditions and was arrested again. His trial began in November 2017, more than 2 years after Catherine Campbell's death. By the time Christopher Garnier stood before a jury, his position had shifted dramatically from anything he had acknowledged during his interrogation. The defense strategy was as calculated as it was deeply troubling. First, the letter he wrote, they argued, was not a genuine admission. It was, according to his legal team, something he produced because he believed it was what investigators wanted to hear. The confession during the 9.5-hour interrogation? Same claim. He was just going along with what was being suggested to him. The man who said, under questioning, that he strangled Catherine Campbell until she stopped breathing was now saying, through his attorneys, that none of that should be taken at face value. Second, and far more controversial, the defense put forward an account of what happened in those 45 minutes in the apartment that placed the responsibility for Catherine's death squarely on Catherine herself. According to the defense,
she offered to engage in rough sex, and
Garnier choked her, and when she died, it was an accident, an unfortunate, tragic, not criminally intended accident. He had also, they claimed, accidentally fractured her nose and accidentally given her 2 black eyes. The defense went further. They pointed out that Catherine was a trained police officer. She had the physical training and tactical knowledge to defend herself if she was being assaulted. The implication being that if Garnier had truly been attacking her, she would have fought back effectively. This argument was made about a woman who was being strangled. And then, in what many observers described as one of the most infuriating aspects of the entire proceeding, the defense introduced a psychiatric diagnosis. Christopher Garnier, they said, had developed post-traumatic stress disorder. As a result of killing Catherine Campbell, he had experienced flashbacks, night terrors, hypervigilance, and difficulty sleeping. His own father wrote a letter to the judge describing his son's suffering. The defense argued that this trauma had put him in a dissociative state during the period between Catherine's death and the following morning, that he had not been in full control of his actions, and that his memory of events was therefore unreliable and fragmentary. A man who spent the weekend after Catherine Campbell's death reuniting with his girlfriend, attending his father's birthday party, and interacting normally with everyone around him, was being presented to the jury as someone so psychologically devastated by what had happened that he could not be held fully accountable in the traditional sense. The prosecution presented its case methodically and thoroughly. There was extensive video evidence. Surveillance footage placed both Catherine and Christopher at the Halifax Ale House. It captured them leaving together and getting into a taxi. It showed Garnier outside the Macaulay Street apartment, retrieving the green bin. Multiple cameras tracked him moving that bin through downtown Halifax toward the harbor area. Witness testimony reinforced every step of the timeline. What the cameras could not show was the 45 minutes inside the apartment. The prosecution filled that gap with the physical evidence, the blood, the forensic analysis, the autopsy findings, and the fragments of acknowledgement Garnier himself had provided during interrogation. The jury deliberated. They were not persuaded by the defense. Christopher Garnier was found guilty on both counts, second-degree murder and indignity to human remains. He was sentenced to life in prison. Inside the courtroom,
inside the courtroom was extremely emotional on both sides. Members of
They held each other after more than 2 years of hearings, of sitting through a defense that blamed their loved one for her own death, of watching a man claim trauma for the act of taking a life. They finally heard the verdict they had come for. It did not bring Catherine back. Nothing ever would. But justice had been done, and every person who had known and loved Constable Catherine Campbell understood what that meant. On the other side of the courtroom, Christopher Garnier's girlfriend Brittany, who had stood by him throughout the trial, who had sat beside him and held his hand every day as he entered and exited the courtroom, broke down in tears. As officers escorted Garnier away, he turned to look at her one last time before being led back through the doors. The sentence carried a parole eligibility date set at 13.5 years. That is not a release date. That is the earliest point at which he becomes eligible to apply. Given the nature of the crime, the calculated cover-up, and the behavior in the period immediately following, the likelihood of early release is a matter that the parole board will weigh carefully when the time comes. He could be in prison far longer. He very likely will be. But the story of Christopher Garnier did not end with the verdict. In the period following his conviction, a controversy emerged that captured national attention in Canada and reignited public anger about the case in a way that few had anticipated. Garnier's PTSD diagnosis, the one his defense team had introduced during trial, the one his own father had written about in letters to the judge, had been determined to qualify him for treatment benefits through Veterans Affairs Canada. Veterans Affairs Canada is the federal department responsible for supporting individuals who have served in the Canadian Armed Forces. It exists to provide pensions, benefits, and mental health services to war veterans and those who have sacrificed for their country in uniform. Christopher Garnier has never served in the Canadian Armed Forces. However, his father did serve, and under the applicable regulations, certain dependents of veterans may be entitled to access Veterans Affairs benefits. Because his father had served, Christopher Garnier was deemed eligible. Canadian taxpayers were being asked to fund the mental health treatment of a convicted murderer who had developed trauma, according to his own defense, specifically from the act of murdering someone. The outrage was significant and immediate. Politicians and veterans advocacy groups spoke out loudly. A motion was put forward to revoke the Veterans Affairs Canada benefits that had been extended to Garnier. That motion was defeated. The argument that prevailed was, in part, that stripping benefits from one individual based on public pressure could set a precedent with broader implications. Others felt that whatever the policy reasoning, the outcome was deeply unjust to every person who had genuinely served this country and to every member of Catherine Campbell's family who had to hear that the man who killed her was receiving government-funded care. Whether or not Garnier continues to receive those benefits remains a subject of ongoing contention. In December 2019, Christopher Garnier filed an appeal against his conviction. The results of that appeal were still being processed as public scrutiny continued to surround the case. There is a particular kind of cruelty embedded in the defense strategy that was deployed at Christopher Garnier's trial. It is not unique to this case. It appears with uncomfortable regularity in cases where women have been killed by men they were intimate with or encountered socially. The argument that a woman who is dead was responsible for the circumstances of her own death. The suggestion that her behavior, her choices, her requests, led inevitably to the moment she stopped breathing. Catherine Campbell went to a bar. She had some drinks. She met a man and left with him. That is a sequence of events that plays out in cities and towns across North America every single night of the week. There is nothing exceptional about it. There is nothing that should lead to a woman ending up strangled, fractured, and discarded in a compost bin by an overpass. What Catherine Campbell encountered that night was not a consequence of her choices. It was the consequence of what Christopher Garnier chose to do. A former paramedic with the training to save lives, who used his knowledge instead to confirm a death, to assess the situation with clinical calm, and to proceed with a cover-up that included wheeling a body through the streets of a sleeping city, sleeping on a couch afterward, explaining away a missing mattress, and spending the weekend reconciling with his girlfriend as if nothing had happened. That is not someone who snapped and lost control. That is someone who made decisions, one after another, in sequence. The jury saw it clearly. The evidence made it undeniable, and the verdict reflected it. Superintendent Jim Pearson of the Integrated Criminal Investigation Division addressed reporters in the days following the discovery of Catherine's body. He spoke with the careful language of a senior officer, but underneath the measured words, the weight of what had happened to a fellow officer was unmistakable. This file evolved very quickly, he said, and it did not have a positive outcome. For the Truro Police Department, for Catherine's colleagues, for the dispatch supervisor who raised the alarm when her friend did not show up for work, The loss was personal in the way that losses within tight professional communities always are. Catherine Campbell had spent 6 years serving in Truro. She commuted every day from Dartmouth because she was committed to her work and to her community. She was the kind of officer who called in when she was running late, because reliability was part of who she was. She deserved to come home. She deserved to return to her apartment on Bed and Arrows Drive, take off her uniform, and get some sleep after a long shift. She deserved all the evenings and weekends and years that were taken from her in a 45-minute window that nobody was watching. Christopher Garnier is serving a life sentence for what he did to her. No letter written in a police interrogation room, no PTSD diagnosis, no defense argument about consensual roughness, no claim of dissociation or memory loss will ever change what Catherine Campbell was, what she meant to the people who loved her, or what she should still be here doing. A police officer, a daughter, a sister, a colleague, a woman who just wanted to help people, gone because of a decision someone else made. And justice, whatever form it takes, whatever weight it carries, now lives in the record of what this jury decided in a Halifax courtroom in 2017. That verdict stands. Catherine Campbell's name stands with it.